welcome to today's On This Day in Tudor History with me, Claire Ridgway, author of several Tudor history books. Now, where am I taking you today? Well, I'm taking you to the reign of Queen Mary I. On this day in Tudor history, the 13th of November 1553, Lady Jane Grey, the former Queen Jane, her husband, Lord Guildford Dudley, his brothers Ambrose and Henry, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, were tried for treason in a public trial at Guildhall in London. The accused were led from the Tower of London, where they'd been imprisoned, on foot in a procession led by a man carrying an axe turned away from the prisoners to show that they'd not yet been found guilty of a capital crime. The Chronicle of Queen Jane describes the procession, although some of the wording is missing. Next followed the Lord Guildford Dudley between blank. Next followed the Lady Jane between blank and her two gentlewomen following her. Next followed the Lord Ambrose Dudley and the Lord Harry Dudley. The Lady Jane was in a black gown of cloth, turned down, the cape lined with frieze velvet and edged about with the same, in a French hood all black with a black billiment, a black velvet book hanging before her, and another book in her hand open. Now, the late historian Eric Ives, in his book on Lady Jane Grey, wrote of how the trial opened with a Catholic liturgy, for of course the Catholic Queen Mary I was now on the throne, having removed Queen Jane, and that the commission chosen to try Jane and these men was headed by Sir Thomas White, the Lord Mayor, and also Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk. Ives notes that the commission was overwhelmingly Catholic in sentiment and explains that Jane, Guildford, Ambrose, Henry and the Archbishop were all charged with high treason. The Archbishop for entering the Tower on the 10th of July and proclaiming Jane, and also for sending troops to Cambridge. Jane and Guildford for taking possession of the Tower and proclaiming Jane, while Jane faced the additional charge of signing various writings. And what they mean by that is signing various writings as Queen. The Archbishop pleaded not guilty at first, but after the case had been presented and before the jury delivered their verdict, he changed his plea to guilty, like that of the others. They were all found guilty as charged, with the men being sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered, which of course was the punishment for male traitors, a full traitor's death, and Jane to be burned alive or beheaded, which was the traitor's death for a female. Historian Leander de Lisle writes of how Jane was recorded as having remained cool and calm during the trial, and that she didn't even react to the sentence. Perhaps her faith sustained her. Jane had used her months of imprisonment studying the Bible and writing prayers as well as letters. In his book on Jane, Eric Ives goes into detail on Jane's writings at this time and how she revealed more about herself than ever before. Her intimacy with the scripture was clear, and she was determined that her death should have meaning. And Ives believes that Jane saw her imprisonment in the Tower and her suffering as a test of her election by God, writing, Jane faced imprisonment in the Tower positively. The loss of liberty was irksome, but the more she could, by God's grace, triumph over hardships, the more confident she could be of her eternal destiny. Now, although Jane had been condemned to death, no date was given for the sentence to be carried out, and it did appear that Mary might just spare her. Things changed, however, in 1554 with Wyatt's rebellion. Although Jane wasn't personally involved in the uprising against the Queen and her proposed marriage to Philip of Spain, her father, Henry Grey, Duke of Suffolk, was involved. Leander de Lisle points out that although the rebellion sought to depose Mary and to replace her with her half-sister Elizabeth, If Jane and Guildford were left alive, then they were potential figureheads for rebellion. So it was time to enact their death sentences. A 3-day reprieve was granted to give time for John Feckenham, a Benedictine, to convert Jane to Catholicism, perhaps in an attempt to save her soul, even if her body couldn't be saved. But Jane stood firm in her faith. She did not waver. Jane and her husband, Lord Guildford Dudley, were executed on the 12th of February 1554. Guildford on Tower Hill and Jane within the Tower confines. And you can hear more about their ends in my video from the 12th of February, so I'll give you a link to that. But what happened to the others who were found guilty on this day in 1553? Well, Ambrose Dudley was released in late 1554, and he went on to serve Mary's half-sister, Queen Elizabeth I, as her Master of Ordnance and a Privy Councillor, and he died a natural death in 1590. Henry Dudley was also released, but he was killed fighting for Mary I's husband, King Philip of Spain, against the French at the Battle of Saint-Quentin in August 1557. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer was tried for heresy in September 1555 and then burned at the stake in Oxford on the 21st of March 1556. So there you have it, the trial of Lady Jane Grey, her husband and supporters on this day in Tudor history in 1553. Thank you for joining me. I'll be back with another, I don't know whether it will be good or bad tomorrow, but it will be a Tudor history event. So I'll be back tomorrow with that. You can subscribe by clicking round about there, and you can hit the bell to be notified as videos go live, but I'll see you tomorrow.